Hi, so at the recording of this video, I still haven't decided if I'm going to publish videos, just experimenting with making them, have no commitment to editing yet, or really what the structure would be. I'm just kind of trying out different structures, what it feels like to just impromptu talk maybe, if I'm not going to use the edit, and just like I said, different structures. So what I'm going to talk about in this video, just really quickly, I did 2 trades this week, and I just wanted to show what I traded since it's not going to be a big haul or unhaul, maybe for the next coming weeks. And then catch up like midweek or halfway through, sort of a midweek wrap up from my last week's TBR, because I'm going to likely go to an area today I don't go to that often, and there are a couple of book boxes that I've noticed there that I'd like to visit, and I would like to not go empty-handed. So first, the trade. Last week's TBR was books of authors that I had read before, and the final book that I read, which I actually overlapped with the first one of this week's, was a Cormac McCarthy book. And a few books before that, I had read a Nicholas Sparks book. Nicholas Sparks is the kind of author that I think appeals to a certain kind of reading taste or reading crowd, as sort of like a really as a bestseller type of novel that you could get at all of the main places, at almost any place you could get books. And so I decided to take that book to a book box near where I work, where I had either retrieved Nicholas Sparks and or seen Nicholas Sparks books in that book box before. That box has it's a pretty big box, and it has a lot of variety. That being said, I found this, and I was thinking just to give, but I actually traded because this was there, and cover spoke to me, but a title such as Difficult Woman spoke to me. The picture of the author was something that was really intriguing, as someone who doesn't take herself incredibly seriously, but probably has some really serious and deep thoughts. That's what the picture vibed me. I shared this book fine. I shared that I found this book with a colleague, and the colleague said that they're familiar with this author and find this author to be very sharp. Sharp like a tack was the word that was used. Sharp just seems like something I really like to read. And I love to read the little quotes in the very front. It just kind of gives me an orientation it gives me an orientation of what the book vibe might be, right? So this book says, for difficult women who should be celebrated for their very nature. And yeah, I'm excited about this book. This is something that when I found it, I thought, can I bump something out of this week's TBR just to read that? That's how much excitement I felt around this book. Ultimately, I'm not going to do that, but I'm really excited to have it on my shelf. The next book that I want to share with you is a trade for the first book that I read in this week's TBR challenge, which was just to kind of read books that I had made a promise to take off my shelf back when I was being very rigid around those parameters. And that book was Lisa Jackson's Whispers. Lisa Jackson's Whispers, kind of like Nicolas Cage, is one of those books that you could probably find in any place that sells books, like, you know, in the airport, at the at Target, at your drugstore, that kind of a book. And so very commercially fronted book, high access to readers who just like plot-driven page-turner books. In any case, I traded it for this, which is The Next Best Thing, which also kind of gave me those vibes, that this is that kind of an author. I think that when I looked at books also written by, this author has quite a few books that they've written. This book is publication date of 2012, so a little more than 10 years old. There's a story about this book, and if you'll indulge me, I will tell it. So I actually had been to the same book box where I retrieved this book because it's in my neighborhood and it's one that I go to often, quite recently, to do a trade of a book that was a little emotional for me. That book also had a story, and as I was rummaging through the books, I was taking a little bit more time since I'd walked. It was my neighborhood, wasn't standing on a busy street or something like that. Have even said hi a few times to the owners of the stewards of this box. As I was paging through this book, I was doing that thing that I do, which is, read the first sentence or read, as I had just stated, the quote at the beginning. And the quote at the beginning of this is, "Please, please, please, let me get what I want this time," which is a song by the Smiths. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting that this book, the vibe of this book and a Smith song, I don't know, I felt some dissonance. I was like, okay, that could make me more interested in this book. And I put it back, and I ultimately chose a young adult at that moment. Well, that very same afternoon or the next day, I was with my child, and my child said, "You know what, Mom? The song that I'm going to learn next on the guitar is Please, 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 Let Me Get What I Want This Time" by the Smiths. And I was like, what? We'd never talked about that song before, and I just thought that that was enough coincidence. I don't necessarily overthink coincidences in life, but I just thought that that coincidence was enough to let me know that this is a book. This book, of any books that are just, as I'm doing a challenge of just books that kind of come to me, right, through rummaging, that this could be a book. So I don't know when I will get to it. I do have kind of a backstock now of, I don't know, probably around 70 books that gives me some more variety, or I guess to play my little weekly TBR challenges. And for the Smiths quote, and for that the Smiths quote and this cover have totally different vibes for me, that I'm excited, and also that little coincidence. Okay, so my midweek wrap up. Here was my TBR from last week. This stack doesn't include Lisa Jackson's Whispers. Lisa Jackson's Whispers I thought was a suspense, and I was kind of excited for, because it took place in Oregon in the 90s, and I lived in Oregon in the 90s going to the University of Oregon. I was a little disappointed to find out that, books, the covers can be deceiving, of course, that both the book wasn't really a suspense. I would classify it more as a romance, a mystery romance. And Oregon as a setting really didn't show up. Like, clearly small townisms, but there wasn't a whole lot of work with setting, so it really could have taken place anywhere. 90s as a setting, part of the setting of the time period, kinda, because this book was riddled with teenage angst that was very familiar in the 90s, and with a lot of 90s movies and media coming out, and to be honest, there was some nostalgia and relatability with that. Also coupled with that was the really problematic sort of devices and even tropes popular during that time. So I fret when there are sexually objective descriptions of teenaged female bodies in that cliched way that needs to be problematized. I fret when there's depictions of sexual violence in SA that are handled in a kind of way, and in this book, the description of it was not dissimilar to the description of other scenes of intimacy, as this was a romance, and it bothered me, and I was kind of stuck in a sort of also introspection about all of the things, like all of the things that influenced me in the 90s. Um, Molly Ringwald coming out and talking about the characters that she played. Fantastic interview I heard once, about maybe not so okay. Um, yeah, I finished the book. I didn't skim it. I finished it. It had its glaring moments. Certainly was a page turner, but one that I could heavily problematize. The next book I read was Waiting by Ha Jin. And oh my gosh, because I read this so close, like only 3 or 4 books in between, Nicholas Sparks' Every Breath. It's the same story, right? As we often find that the same stories are told over and over, and are they told through new angles. Ha Jin is Chinese author. The setting is in China. It is in the 1950s. So Cultural Revolution and the time of Mao Zedong is very relevant in this book. There's also a description of SA, which was handled very much differently than how it was handled in Whispers. And overall, this book is a romance. Another romance, but definitely with the awards, with literary merit. Like, this is a literary fiction with a very, like, the unrequited love as the primary trope that we are all very familiar with. Yeah, it was a good book. I liked this book. The next book that I read was, and the last one I'll talk about, is this Lilac Girls by Martha Hall Kelly. This is her first novel, and it is very much a historical fiction. I had those vibes. The back synopsis on the back is not what this book is, and if I liked this book. It is what it is. It's that I think what I predicted the mission of this book was to tell stories that kind of should be told or need to be told. Even in the book itself, it says, the end of World War II, the men got their notice and their stories and their time to be heard, and it seemed like the women's place in all of it, in the suffering and the perpetration, etc., was sort of forgotten and or stifled in a lot of ways. So yes, the telling of these historical events around World War II, Europe, and right after, I really appreciated, as I predicted, the telling through multiple points of views, through different places. The one thing I would want more from this book was that the character, the villain of this book, really, Hertha, I think it's a bold move to write through Hertha's point of view, and I think I would have liked at the end of the war to hear more from her reflection, more from her experience as herself in incarceration, right? So Hertha is it's a fictionalized real historical character, by the way, and I just would have liked that more in this book. I have a friend who is doing a master's in history, so they've asked for this book, being a historical fiction, written by a female, about female points of view, and so that's where this book is going. It's not going in a box today. The next 2 books are just the books that I might do a recap on. Or I might not, depending on, I guess, how I feel. But these are my 2 last books from this week's TBR. I've already started An American Marriage. Loving it so far. Actually, just the sort of shift in storytelling between these 3 books, all really having romance. Romance is very much part of all of these books, in fact, and part of Whispers as well. So we're really having a strong romance reading week, but told through very different ways. And this story, the storytelling is so different than the one that I just read, Lilac Girls, that it just gives me the delight that that I feel in being a reader and having access to the way that stories are told, the stories, what's focused on, or what features or tropes are developed and how, and the settings. Yeah, it's been a great reading week. I'm looking forward to these last two books, and I might do for myself and or for publication a recap, but I won't have the physical copies likely because I am just kind of planning on doing that quick trade for a couple of my leftover books today. And I guess this is me just brainstorming out loud. My next video will be a TBR for what's coming next week once I at least get all the way through, most of the way through Arabesque, which is the last book in this week's TBR.